And particularly being in Windsor, for me, Windsor is hers, so she loved it here. She spent most of her time here. Showing you around today is very much a case I'm trying to make sure I'm doing it the way she'd want you to see it.
The Prince and Princess of Wales do not run. That is not a comment on their courage. It is a statement of fact about how they were built. William spent 10 years in the British military. Catherine has walked into rooms where every camera in the world was pointed at her face and held her expression like stone. These are two people who were trained, from the moment they understood what their lives would be, to stand still under pressure. So when they ran, you need to ask what made them run. It was a Tuesday in late November. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. And then, just before midnight, something that had been hiding underneath that house for 2 years was finally found. By morning, the Wales family was gone. By afternoon, white forensic tents were standing on the lawns at Windsor. By evening, MI5 had joined the investigation, and the man responsible, he was already gone. 3 miles from Windsor, a rented cottage sat empty and left in a hurry because somehow, within hours of his discovery, he knew. Stay with me, because this story is not the story you think it is. And the thing they found under that floor is something I still find hard to say out loud. I'm going to take you through every layer of this. The night it happened, the investigation, the tunnels, the chambers, the photographs, the journals, and the man who spent 2 winters lying in the dark underneath the room where Prince Louis sleeps. Before we go further, hit subscribe if this is the kind of deep dive journalism you come here for. Stay until the end, because the final piece of this story is the piece nobody in the press is talking about. The house they chose on purpose. To understand why this story matters the way it does, you have to understand what Adelaide Cottage meant to William and Catherine before any of this happened. When they announced the move to Windsor in 2022, every paper in Britain covered it the same way, as a lifestyle choice. Smaller, house, less grandeur, more grass. A prince and princess stepping away from the palace machinery to give their children something closer to a normal life. But it was more than that. It was a decision made by 2 parents who had thought very carefully about the kind of childhood they wanted for George, Charlotte, and Louis. Adelaide Cottage was chosen deliberately over larger, more prestigious options on the estate. It had gardens instead of galleries. It had a kitchen where Catherine actually cooked. It had bedrooms where 3 children could grow up with doors that closed, and a sense that life had edges and privacy, and some small amount of ordinary in it. They gave something up to live there. They chose it anyway. That is the first thing you need to hold in your mind, because the story of what was found underneath that house is also the story of what was taken from it. And what was taken was not a building. It was a plan, a belief, a very deliberate choice about how to raise 3 children inside an impossible life. Now let's talk about what was under the floor. The night it all fell apart. A routine structural inspection. That is what started this. Engineers went into Adelaide Cottage with clipboards and instruments to look at the foundations. Standard work on an old building. Nothing about the order sheet suggested this was anything other than ordinary maintenance. 17 minutes in, the evening stopped being ordinary. Underneath Adelaide Cottage runs a network of passages older than the cottage itself. Some of it dates back to the English Civil War of the 1640s. And here is the thing that should make your jaw drop. Every survey missed it. Every security sweep missed it. Every official record of that property going back decades contained nothing. Not a line, not a footnote, not a question mark. Centuries of stone corridors running beneath one of the most scrutinized properties in Britain, and not one person on the payroll knew they were there. Now, tunnels alone would have been an infrastructure headache and a weekend of paperwork. Old stone does not attack anybody. You seal the entrances, you add it to the archive, you close the file. The tunnels were not the problem. What the engineers found inside them was. And I am going to make you wait for that. The same way that family had to wait in the dark on a Tuesday night while protection officers swept those lower corridors and worked out the full shape of what they were dealing with. Because if I hand it to you right now, you will file it as a detail and scroll on. The only way to hear this, the way that family heard it, is to arrive at it the same way they did. At 1:45, the infrared sensors inside the walls of Adelaide Cottage registered movement in a place where nothing should have been moving. William woke first. 10 years of military training had rewired his sleep, and the small change in air pressure as protection officers began working through the lower corridors was enough to pull him out of it. Catherine woke seconds behind him, the way mothers do. Before anyone has said a word, neither of them spoke. Two people who have lived their whole adult lives under observation know instinctively that in the first minute of a crisis, listening gives you more than asking. The knock came soft. It did not stop. William crossed the room in 4 strides and opened the door on Marcus Headley, head of their personal protection unit. 3 officers held positions in the corridor behind him, and his face had already delivered the message before he opened his mouth. Nobody in that hallway was going to send this family back to bed with a reassurance. What was under the floor? Headley told them that the structural engineers had found evidence of recent human activity in the spaces under the house. Not a century ago, not 50 years ago. Recent, repeated, recent and repeated. Tools with no rust on them, footprints and dust that had not yet settled. Empty water bottles with purchase dates from the previous month. A folding chair, clean, a thermal blanket, and photographs. Not archive images, not history. Recent photographs of the Wales family going about their ordinary day, taken from angles that told you the person holding that camera knew their schedule, knew their movements, knew the hours. Somebody had been sitting underneath that house while the family slept above it, and that person had been doing it for a while. Headley put it to William in 5 words, and sources close to that corridor say William repeated them back to his wife exactly as he heard them. They were under the house, not at the gate, not over the wall, not in the trees with a long lens like every other person who has ever tried to get near that family. Under the floor of the room where his children sleep. Now ask yourself, what do you do with that sentence? Where do you put it? Because there is no shelf in your mind built for that information. There is no prepared response. There is only the moment after you hear it, and the corridor your children are sleeping at the end of, and the choice you make in the next 3 seconds. Catherine was already moving toward the children's rooms before Headley finished the briefing. She did not wait for the rest of it. She did not ask a single follow-up question. The moment she understood that the question on the table was her children's safety, she was gone down that hall. The evacuation. George, Charlotte, and Louis had to be woken gently, dressed quickly, and moved to somewhere secure, while investigators worked out the full extent of what was sitting beneath their bedrooms. Catherine has spent years building a public image defined by calm. In that hallway, on that night, the calm slipped about a centimeter, and behind it stood the woman who runs every decision in that family through a single filter. What happens to those 3 children? William stood in the doorway watching her move from bed to bed. Her voice stayed low, and even while she told 3 confused children that they were going on a midnight adventure. George, 11 years old, and already old enough to understand that his family comes with complications other families never meet. Charlotte, 9, sharper than most adults give her credit for. And Charlotte asked the question that cut straight through the story her mother was building. "Are we safe here, Mommy?" Catherine paused. Half a second, no more. William saw it from the doorway. He understood exactly what that half-second cost her. The evacuation ran clean. Security teams rehearse these scenarios constantly and spend their careers hoping never to use them. 3 vehicles waited on the drive with engines running, and routes already agreed. Staff had already pulled the emergency bags that get updated 4 times a year and stored where nobody has to go looking for them at midnight. Think about that detail. Bags packed and updated 4 times a year. That is what it looks like underneath the ordinary days of that family. That is the infrastructure of a life lived permanently 1 incident away from needing to leave. William carried Louis down the stairs, 6 years old, still half asleep against his father's shoulder. Catherine came behind with a hand on each of the older 2, and here is the image that stays with me from this whole story. Woman standing on her own gravel drive in the November cold, coat pulled over what she went to bed wearing, one of her son's shoes in her hand because it had come off on the stairs, smiling down at 3 frightened children so that they would not see the fear on the faces of the grown men standing around her in the dark. The Princess of Wales on her own doorstep, being moved out of her own home. Before she got in the car, Catherine turned back for one last look at that house, and I keep thinking about what she saw. Warm windows, a family home standing perfectly still in the dark, a building that had been a decision, a deliberate and carefully made decision, now turned into something she did not recognize. William's hand found hers, and they left. The investigation begins. By dawn, white forensic tents stood on the lawns of Adelaide Cottage, each one positioned over a separate entrance to the tunnel network running beneath. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Wright got the call at midnight. She came in for two reasons: her record on historical property crime and a security clearance level that allowed her to operate inside the specific legal and procedural framework that governs anything touching that family. Her team went in with ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment. If you have never encountered it, ground-penetrating radar is the technology surveyors use to see voids beneath solid ground without breaking the surface. It is exactly the kind of tool that can reveal in one night what centuries of surveys missed, and the map it built was worse than anyone expected. The passages did not stop beneath Adelaide Cottage. They ran on, they connected. They reached Windsor Castle itself. They connected to 4 other properties on the estate, Frogmore Cottage and Royal Lodge among them. Sit with that for a moment. For years, and possibly for a great deal longer than years, there had been a way of moving around the entire Windsor estate that bypassed every gate, every checkpoint, every camera, and every system designed by people who spend their professional lives imagining how someone might try to reach that family. And not one person on the payroll knew it existed. The tunnels themselves could have been contained. Old stone is not a threat. Seal the entrances, install sensors, update the plans, close the file. The reason this escalated from an infrastructure problem to a national security incident was what the evidence told them about how recently and how regularly those passages had been used. In one chamber, sitting directly beneath the bedroom where Prince Louis sleeps 20 feet above, investigators found a camp. Somebody had set himself up down there. A chair, a blanket, enough water to stay for extended periods, and more photographs, not random images. A curated, deliberate selection that told investigators exactly what the person behind the lens was watching. 4. The school run. Catherine's morning route across the estate. The precise window each day when the protection detail changes, shift, and the ground goes quieter than at any other hour. Nobody stumbles into that pattern. That is research. That is somebody doing homework with the patience and discipline of a professional. 2 years. I want you to hold one number, 2. That is the number I have been building toward since the beginning of this video, and I am going to give it to you the same way Catherine received it, inside a briefing room, with everything else already on the table, as the last detail that makes the whole picture land. Deeper in the system, in chambers you can only reach by crawling through gaps barely wide enough for a grown man. The search teams found older camps. Not last month, not last year. Items dating back close to 2 years, 2 years, 2 winters, 2 Christmases with the tree in the window, and the children running down the stairs in the morning. 2 summers with George and Charlotte and Louis playing in that garden. The school runs, the birthday cakes, the ordinary Tuesday evenings, and underneath all of it, running parallel to every single day of it, a man lying in the dark, writing in a notebook, watching. The journals came out of the ground in poor condition and went straight to transcribers. The handwriting gets progressively harder to read as the volumes go on. That deterioration on the page maps neatly onto something else, a man's gradual descent into the ground and away from everything on the surface. Catherine's reaction to that briefing was the controlled fury of a mother who has just been told that the one boundary she believed she still had was never there at all. She had made her peace long ago with the public dimensions of her life, the cameras at every engagement, the commentary about her appearance, her choices, her parenting. She absorbed all of that as the cost of the life she chose. It was a cost she had costed, a price she had agreed to pay. This was different in kind. A man had been underneath her sleeping children for 2 years, watching, waiting, planning something nobody had yet been able to name. Who he was. The forensics team had a digital trail by the end of the first evening. a moderator on an online forum dedicated to royal history, had flagged a series of posts that had been worrying him for a year and a half. The account posted under the name Windsor Truth Seeker. It detailed theories about treasure buried beneath royal properties, maps that looked very much like the annotated documents sitting in evidence bags in Berkshire. Miranda Foster, a psychologist specializing in obsessive behavior and the one-sided attachments people form with public figures, was brought in to map the digital footprint. The progression she found follows a pattern she has documented over 20 years of this work. Interest becomes study. Study becomes theory. Theory becomes grievance. And somewhere along that line, the person stops being a man reading about a royal family and starts being the main character of a story in which the royal family is hiding something from him personally. The name came out of the archives, which is fitting given how this whole thing started. Malcolm Hendricks, 47 years old, formerly a curator at a small historical society in Kent. His colleagues had watched him become progressively more erratic over the course of a year before the society let him go. That was 3 years before any of this. After that, he had no job to return to, and he gave the whole day, every day, to this. And here is the part that makes him dangerous, rather than merely sad. He was good at it. He could read a 17th century architectural plan. He knew how to work an archive without leaving a trail. He had the professional training to locate a door that fell off the official records 400 years ago. And he had nothing else in his life. He came to believe that the Wales family was standing between him and a discovery that would restore his professional reputation and vindicate everything the museum had taken from him. 3 children asleep in a cottage became, in the story he was telling himself underground, an obstacle. The journals confirmed it once the transcribers worked through them. Hendricks was spending 8 and 10 hours at a stretch down there. He wrote about preferring it. The dark suited him. The silence suited him. He felt closer, he wrote, to the history he was hunting than he had ever felt in a reading room. And then the entries about the family begin. They start as observation. Times, routines, weather, movements, clinical, systematic. Then they change. He starts writing about them the way you write about people you know, with familiarity, with assumption, with a kind of intimacy that belongs only to people who have shared something, except that he had never spoken a word to any of them. He had built relationships in his head with a woman and 3 children who did not know he existed, constructed entirely from photographs he took through a lens from a place they could not see. William read that psychological assessment and understood the shape of the problem immediately. Sensors do not fix this. Cameras do not fix this. A man who gave 2 years of his life to being underneath your house is not a man who reads a news report about police finding his camp and returns to ordinary life. Hendricks was still out there. The king and the wed of history. King Charles received his briefing at Clarence House. In front of staff, he held his expression still. On the phone to his son shortly afterward, sources suggest he did not bother. This landed on Charles the way it did because of history. In 1982, Michael Fagan walked into Buckingham Palace, reached the Queen's bedroom, and sat on the end of her bed, story that has haunted royal security planning for 4 decades. More recently, Jaswant Singh Chahal climbed into the grounds of Windsor Castle on Christmas Day 2021, carrying a crossbow. The Old Bailey sentenced him in October 2023. Both men came over the wall. Everything the palace has built since Fagan is designed around people coming over the wall. This one came from underneath. That is why the king's voice changed on that phone call. There's a second reason it hit Charles the way it did, and it has a name nobody in that family says out loud. The last time this family lost control of who was pointing a camera at them, it ended in a tunnel in Paris in August 1997, and a funeral at Westminster Abbey 6 days later. Charles walked behind that coffin with 2 boys, 15 and 12. 30 years on, his son rang him at midnight to say a stranger had been photographing his grandchildren from a hole in the ground. The photographs, the tunnel, the loss of control over a lens. Nobody on that call had to say her name. The children. This is the part hardest to discuss without weight. Lewis had nightmares about monsters in the ground. He is 6. His mind took a midnight evacuation and produced the only story a child that age could, that something under the earth wanted to hurt his family. Catherine sat with him night after night, explaining patiently that the ground is just ground. Charlotte went a different way. She started checking the doors, then checking them again. A 9-year-old confirming every night that the windows are shut and the locks are turned is a small thing to watch and an enormous thing to carry. Her mother watched her do it and didn't stop her, understanding that Charlotte needed to. George went quiet, watching his parents' faces for the worry they were working to hide. He asked about the investigation, with a precision that told William exactly where his mind had been going at night. Eventually, William found him standing at a window over Kensington Gardens, shoulders squared, and it went through William like a current, because he'd seen that photograph of himself. A boy at a window, shoulders already learning the weight of what's coming. The conversation between them was short and honest. William had decided years ago he would not give his children the emotional distance he grew up inside, that they could bring him a fear without navigating a household to get there. That promise was tested by an 11-year-old asking whether the man was still out there. He had to decide how much truth a boy of 11 can hold, when the truth is that a stranger had been lying under his bedroom for 2 winters. His mother never faced that question. He did, and he answered it, honestly, in the room, the way he'd promised himself he would. The manhunt and the disappearance. Footage analysis kept returning one man, late 40s, appearing near Adelaide Cottage too often for coincidence. His vehicle led investigators to a rented cottage 3 miles from Windsor. Officers found it empty, left in a hurry, but not carelessly. He'd taken what mattered. He had known, somehow within hours of the discovery, that his tunnels had been opened, and he was gone. The manhunt used resources normally reserved for counterterrorism. He had detailed knowledge of royal properties, professional-grade surveillance equipment, and 2 years underground building toward something nobody could yet name: theft, harm, or something that resists a clean description. The uncertainty alone justified the resources. A nationwide alert, a public appeal, 6 months of digital forensics. Nothing. Hendricks had prepared for this like everything else. The cottage revealed research extending well past Windsor, detailed work on Sandringham and Balmoral. He wasn't finished. Dr. Foster's updated psychological assessment put a chill through the investigation. Isolation, obsession, and a significant public humiliation. Losing his tunnels counts as one, tends to push a person from watching toward doing. He had been watching for 2 years. Nobody wanted to say out loud what came next. The decision to leave. 3 weeks after the evacuation, William and Catherine arrived at a conversation they'd both been avoiding. The upgrades at Adelaide Cottage were real and necessary. Every tunnel entrance sealed with sensors, additional cameras, facial recognition, the full architecture of an overhaul. All correct. None of it was the problem. The problem was the knowledge. You can seal stone. You cannot unseal a memory. Every room, kitchen, sitting room, bedrooms, was now a room with 2 years of a man lying in the dark beneath it. The garden where 3 children played had a different geography now, running 20 feet further down than any of them had known. Catherine walked through the cottage alone before leaving for the last time. The kitchen where she'd made birthday cakes and weeknight dinners. The sitting room where film nights had become a family institution. The bedrooms where 3 children had grown from babies into people with opinions and arguments, and their own specific weight. None of it erased. All of it tainted. She understood the difference precisely. Adelaide Cottage had been an answer to a question she and William asked before George was born: whether children could be raised royal without being raised only royal. That question now looked, in her own word, naive. The guilt made no logical sense and would not leave. William walked the rooms like an engineer. Necessary work, all signed off, but he understood the upgrades would change what the place is. Safer and more monitored than ever, and it would feel like everywhere else they'd ever lived. Whether either of them would want to walk back through that door was a question neither put into words. The statement to the press used 11 words. The Prince and Princess of Wales are relocating to allow for comprehensive infrastructure and security work at Adelaide Cottage. By evening, it was everywhere. front pages, rolling coverage, photographers filming an empty driveway in the rain. Members of the public came and stood at the gates with flowers, because that's what this country does when it doesn't know what else to do. What this really cost. There's a thread running through this whole story, and it has a name. Diana used to take her boys out at night, down to a fast food place, into a car with no royal crest, anywhere the job couldn't reach them for an hour. She spent her life followed by men with cameras. She died with a camera pointed at the car. Her son bought a small house with a garden so his own children would never learn that weight. He carried his own child down the stairs in the dark and out into the November cold because a man with a lens had found him anyway. From underneath. Same staircase feeling. Same two arms. The job found him anyway. Malcolm Hendricks never found his treasure. There is no gold under Windsor. There never was. Just old stone, water, and 400 years of forgotten paperwork. None of it worth what he spent chasing it. He gave up his career, 2 years of his life, whatever was left of his mind after the cottage, the journals, the hours alone in the dark. The only thing he successfully removed from the Windsor estate was a family's belief that they were safe in their own beds. He's out there tonight, still convinced, in all likelihood, that he's the wronged party in this story. What he actually is a man who took 3 children's home away from them and found nothing. Out arrow 2. This story leaves you without resolution. Hendricks hasn't been found. Adelaide Cottage stands empty behind security upgrades that turned it into exactly the kind of place William and Catherine were trying to leave behind. And 3 children are navigating the knowledge that the ordinary childhood built so carefully for them had a floor they never knew about. Charlotte checks the doors. Louis asks when they're going back to their real house. George stands at windows with squared shoulders and his father's face. William and Catherine stood together at a window on Christmas Eve, the children finally asleep, talking about spring, where they'd be living, what it would look like. Neither said the obvious thing, that Adelaide Cottage is probably finished for them. Not lost to a threat with a name, lost to knowing. The tunnels can be sealed. The sensors can go in. Every item on the list can be signed off. The knowledge stays. If you stayed with this to the end, you know it isn't a story about a break-in. It's a story about the thing no security upgrade can reach. Drop your thoughts below, because the question this story asks is one every parent understands, whether they live in a palace or a 2-up 2-down on an ordinary street. How do you put something back in the box once your children know it's there? Subscribe if you want to be here when the next chapter breaks, because Hendricks is still out there, and this is not finished.